Hey guys and girls, Mark here from SeaWorld, and today we have a lens review. Now this review was asked or requested of me from a subscriber by the name of Matthew, and so today we're going to be looking at the Laowa 12mm f2.8 Zero Distortion. It's a lens that I use exclusively for my super long exposures, especially of oceanscapes, landscapes, that kind of thing. And there are many tutorials on my channel here that relate to long exposure photography with this lens. It is a rectilinear lens, which means that it doesn't suffer from the crazy fisheye barrel distortion that you would associate with a fisheye lens. It is it's dense, it's got relatively good build, it's strong build. We're going to get into all of the features of it. There are some positives, many positives in my book, and a few negatives. But because I bought this lens, it wasn't given to me, I can say what I like about it, and no one's going to say anything about that. So anyway, before we get into it, I'd like to ask, if you haven't already, to please do subscribe to this channel. Please make sure to hit that notifications bell so that you'll be updated as and when new content is available from SeaWorld Earth. And I will be touching on something at the end of the video that relates to how we, you, me, anyone who subscribes to this channel can save the world in a conservation sense. But that's all yet to come. All right, so please do sit down, enjoy, and let's get into the Laowa 12mm f2.8 Zero Distortion. Okay, so as you will see, the Laowa has a lot of interesting specifications and features, from the water repellent front coating to its 2 aspherical and 3 low dispersion glass elements. That said, it's not exactly a cheap lens and is currently listed at $849 US new via the manufacturer's website store. Now it goes without saying that you're getting some pretty unique optics, but you're definitely going to be paying for them too. Now, while this lens is ridiculously wide, there are some other lens options that offer even greater fields of view should you need them. There are, of course, the Canon 11-24 f4, the Voigtlander 10mm f5.6, although that lens is only available in Leica M and Sony FE mounts. Continuing on, the RX 11mm f4. Next up is the Samyang 10mm f2.8, and rounding out with another lens from Venus Optics again, this time is the 10-18mm f4.5 to 5.6, although that is only at this time available for Sony FE mount. For micro four thirds mounts, another lens of interest could be the 10mm f2 Zero Distortion MFT, again from Venus Optics. Now it seems that Venus Optics are in the game of turning the world on its head when it comes to crazy lenses. And that bears true with their 9mm f5.6 FFRL, which covers an incredible 135 degrees field of view, which also allows quite impressive close focusing options of just 12 centimeters from the subject to the sensor, allowing the photographer to take some pretty crazy images. Until quite recently, in the world of imaging, a wide lens offering 14mm focal length was considered supremely wide, and in fact it is. But as the demand for lenses increased in order to serve up imaging of options from fresh and new perspectives, so did some of the manufacturers step up to the plate. Now, Venus Optics is one of them, and in an effort to stand out from the crowd, Venus Optics can be seen as the brand leading the way. Their 15mm f4 1:1 macro is also a lens that I own, and it allows the user to focus pretty much down to the surface of the front glass element. It offers a truly unique perspective to the photographer, but the closer one gets to the subject, the harder it becomes to efficiently and effectively light the subject adequately. Now, nobody said it was easy, right? Using a 12mm lens as a go-to option is very rare. Now, it's only since I really came to Okinawa that I've started to shoot more long exposure, especially with still imagery. Now, you can see a lot of those tutorials on some of the places and some of the things that I've shot anywhere through the library of my video uploads on this channel. Now, for a lot of the imaging that I do with this particular lens, it is long exposure, wide angle, obviously, imaging, especially of the oceans, but also of the Milky Way. At the moment, I'm the only photographer that offers a photo shoot for clients underneath the expanse of the Milky Way at the right time of year, as you can see by this image here. I fell in love with this lens for what it can do with regards to the ocean, and so I just then adapted that to continue with my astrophotography, so that I didn't need two different lenses for pretty much the same kind of application. Now, when I am shooting long exposure photography with this lens, obviously because of the form factor of not just this, but many of the super wide angle lens, you'll see that they've got this quite bulbous front element on the lens. To prepare this lens for long exposure photography, you need to have filters in place, ND filters, grad filters, etc., etc. So because of the bulbous form factor of the front element, you're not going to be able to screw in filters as you would normally do on a lens that has like a flat front. So what you need is an adapter like this, and this is from the company Kani. I am sponsored by the distributor of those filters here in Japan, although this video is not sponsored by them in any way, shape or form, because I was requested basically to make the video. Now, there's a little grub screw on top of here which you undo, and you then just put that onto the lens until you see it slot in like so, and then you just turn that clockwise until it stops. It comes to a hard stop, and then you just screw down that grub screw just to stop the rotation of the adapter there. Okay, that's good. And then you actually have your filter holder itself, okay, on the back of which you've got a couple of small little shoulders here that fit over the outer shoulder of the adapter, and on the other side you have this spring-loaded retention screw. So all I do to put it on is I'll put those two stoppers over one corner first. I've got the spring-loaded lock screw here. I just pull that out, let it go, and there it is. It sits perfectly on the camera. All right. Now, in the filter holder itself, you've actually got two sets of trays where you would then place your filters, and you can actually build that up to hold three filters, as it were, but you have to be careful because then it starts to encroach on the outer edges of the field of view, bearing in mind that this is a prime lens. I can't zoom through, so I've got to be very careful with how I position the filters on it, and especially with the number of filters on it. Okay, so closest to the lens, I'm going to place an ND filter, and the filters that you use with this lens or with this holder are for the NDs. They are the 4-inch square, the 100mm squares. Okay, and they will slide in one filter holder there. Okay, so that's now, and that is the camera fitted with an ND16, and if I wanted to then add also a grad filter to that on the outside, here is a 0.9 soft grad. That quite simply then will go on the outside, and because I can see through the ND filter through the eyepiece when I'm setting my composition, I can then set my graduation point on my composition as is needed. So there you go, that's pretty much how you set up this lens for long exposure photography. In this case I'm using, as mentioned, the Kani filters. I'll link to those in the description below. Now there is one point with regards to using these kind of filters. Let's just take these out for a minute. What you do actually have closest to the lens, you will see that there is a recessed and threaded area within the filter holder, and that is in order to fit a very slimline polarizing filter. Here you can see it here. You see it's not like your regular filters, but it's very, very slimline, and that will actually screw directly into the filter holder before you put the ND filters in, and you can operate the rotation of that polarizing lens by this little jog dial here. Okay, now when you're shooting with such a super wide angle lens like a 12mm 14, 11, be careful not to put a polarizing filter in the mix, because that polarizing lens is not going to be able to cover that complete field of view. So what you'll end up with is a horrible, very dark polarized segment of your field of view, of your composition, whereas the rest won't have that applied. And it's something that it is an absolute beast to repair in post-production, if at all it's possible. I've never been able to accomplish that, so please, please, please be aware of that. Don't fit a polarizing filter when you're shooting super wide angle 12mm and wider, and maybe even 14mm, to be honest. I have only ever really used polarizing filters from about 24mm and narrower. So be wary of that. Given that I use mine predominantly wide open at f2.8 for astrophotography, I really don't worry too much about minimum focal applications. On some client shoots though, I do have to be careful when posing people, because when limbs, especially feet and legs, when they approach the lens, they can be distorted to a point that renders the person in the shot to have disproportionately sized feet. It's what I call the Coco the Clown look. Now, the lens itself is made from all metal construction with 180 degrees focus throw that stops with a very definite stop at infinity. Now, focus throw is simply the rotational travel on the focusing ring between its closest point and the infinity focusing limitations. Now, on the weight side of things, the Laowa 12mm f2.8 Zero Distortion weighs in at around 609 grams or 1.3 pounds. Aperture selection is again manual via the Aperture ring, which offers marked stops between the full aperture increments of f2.8 through f22. There is enough room to select the f-stops between the full stops, but that's down to the dexterity of the user. Construction-wise, the lens is built from 16 glass elements in 10 groups, which include 2 aspherical and 3 extra low dispersion glass elements. To finish off the features of the lens, it has a coating that helps reduce the accumulation of dust and moisture should you be shooting in such conditions. Now, another thing about this lens is that it does not have any environmental sealing, so it should be used with caution in times of inclement weather. While not inclement, and as you may well know, that I live in Okinawa, Japan, and as such we get an incredible humidity index in the summer months, at times around 90 degrees. Now, I've had this lens for about 3 years, and I shoot consistently in close proximity to waterfalls, rivers and oceans in all states of flow and agitation. And while I do keep this and all of my photography gear in climate controlled cabinets, I haven't yet had any issues with condensation or humidity being trapped inside the lens. Now, the biggest selling point of this lens is the highly touted by the manufacturer of its zero distortion capability. Now, while this may not be 100% accurate, it is pretty darn close. Now, in the times when I've needed to correct for distortion, or what I call tombstoning of buildings in the composition, that is, they appear to lean away from the vertical, if I do have to tilt the lens up or down, I found correction in Photoshop to be around an error margin of about 1% for the vertical alignment. Now, this distortion does fade somewhat with the further you focus the lens. Now, one thing that you may notice with this lens is if you do elect to shoot wide open by way of ND filter use during the day, that there is a very real downside to seeing some vignetting or darker corners in the resulting imagery. Whilst this can be sorted out later in post-production via the lens profile option in Adobe Lightroom, for example, it's always nice to shoot in a way that requires as little as possible editing after the fact. You'll be glad to know that this vignetting disappears once you start closing down the aperture from f4 and smaller. Now, I use this lens on photo shoots for clients under the Milky Way, and as such I've yet to have a client who has mentioned the aspect of vignetting in their imagery. This is probably due to the fact that we are in fact actually shooting at night, and the vignetting is accepted as simply being a component part of the low light setting. And it's not really massively obvious anyway. Now, one thing that is apparent though is coma and chromatic aberration. Now, in the latter case, the lens does suffer from surprisingly little chromatic aberration. For those of you unsure of what chromatic aberration is, it is the appearance of colour fringes around elements in a photograph that have high contrast values, such as bright stars against a dark sky. It is also quite common along the defined edges of metallic objects such as automobiles, road signs, or industrial piping, etc. Now, this can be edited out in post-production, but again, it can be a pain in the posterior to do so. Now, coma, on the other hand, in the photographic realm, is defined as a spherical lens aberration in which the image of a point of light is rendered as a comet-shaped blur. Now, coma tends to be more prevalent and manifests itself more in imagery closer to the edges and in the corners of compositions taken with lenses such as this, and this effect is pronounced to a greater extent when the lens is set to the widest aperture, which is what you would use in astrophotography. Now, this is quite evident in this shot here. At first glance, it looks all wonderful and nice, but when we punch into the edges and the corners, you can see that the presence of both chromatic aberration and coma. These detrimental elements would be more of a concern to a photo editor in a highly respected medium, platform or magazine than they would be by your average client. Now, I'm not saying that one is of less importance against the other. All I'm saying is that the deterioration of an image taken by this lens in a sense of chromatic aberration and coma should not pose any reason for aesthetic negatives when it comes to your client's satisfaction. Now, if there was one negative that I would say about this lens, though, is the potential for light leaks when shooting long exposures. I've tried to employ all manner of ways of shrouding the filter holder, the filters and the eyepiece when shooting long exposures in all times of the day, whether midday, morning, nighttime, all the same. Now, in the majority of image, I'll get a light leak which can be seen in both the upper and lower segments of the raw image, as can be seen here. Now, quite where this is coming from at this time has got me quite confused. It is something that can be controlled in post, but again, it's an unnecessary step that shouldn't be there, given both the cost associated and the quality of the lens and the complete filter setup from the holder to the glass itself. Now, in summary, I like this lens. It plays a large role in a lot of my imaging and is something that will continue to be employed as such. It's a solid little player and it yields great results, but it shouldn't be considered as a walk-around lens. Now, one thing to be wary of when you're working with manual lenses, fully manual lenses, and also with the Laowa range of lenses, what you'll find is when you fit the lens to your camera, you're not going to be seeing any aperture information on your LCD at the back of your camera. All you're going to see is normally like f0 or f00. In this case, I believe it is f00. And that's because you set your aperture via the external aperture ring that can be found right here next to where the lens fits to the camera. So always be very aware of that. I know when you first start using manual lenses, it can be a bit frustrating, but when you get into the habit of it, it kind of becomes second nature. And also, seeing as I come from predominantly a video background, it's quite normal for video lenses to have that feature where you set the aperture on the actual lens itself, as opposed to via your regular camera controls as normal. Given that I also teach photography here in Okinawa, I've had a couple of folks buy this lens and subsequently have me teach them on it. Once they realise both its potential and limitations, they start to get some pretty wild results. For me, I continue to use it especially with my ocean and landscape imaging. It's an integral lens within my current gear bag, but as mentioned before, it does have its limitations. So there you have it, folks, and especially to one of this channel's subscribers by the names of Matthew, as mentioned before, who requested the review of this lens. This is the first in what I hope will be many gear review videos interspersed with the wildlife adventures I'm planning to get into as the year progresses. Now, I'd like to take this chance to obviously ask you, if you haven't already, to please do subscribe and slap a like on this video. Round out the trifecta of support by placing that notifications bell in a chokehold so that it submits to you and sends you notifications as and when new content has been uploaded by yours truly. Now, in closing, I'd like to say I'm on a subscriptions drive in order to grow the following of this channel. If this ever catches on and the channel starts to generate ad revenue, my plan is to donate that ad revenue to conservation efforts. Initially here in Okinawa to start with, but then eventually on a global scale if we ever get that far down the road. This plan is also further explained in the video here. So all that remains is for me to wish you all the best. Please do stay safe, stay happy, and above all, stay healthy. And until we meet again, a big thanks to all your eyes and ears. It's all very much appreciated. Cheers and take care.